Welcome back to Ducks and Pucks. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, on a special Easter edition for everybody. Hope you enjoy the holiday, and we're going to get you caught up on the action. We just had one game to look at against Colorado this past weekend, and we'll preview the next two games. We'll also go over some stuff regarding tie-breaking situations, CORSI stats, talk a little bit more about the playoffs and some things the Ducks need to do. But first, let's get back to the Colorado game. And, this was a game I thought maybe the Ducks would win this one, Eddie, but it looked like we rested a lot of players and just came up short there at the end.
Yeah, we couldn't really pull it out in the end. It was a good start, obviously, with the first two lines getting going with Sekach and Raquel getting us back into the game after Mitchell scored early, and then finally, a pretty decent second period, but Landis converting on the power play, and then Colorado shows why they were such a good team last year, and you a guy like Duchesne a breakaway, and even without McKinnon, they're still a pretty fast team, and he's pretty much going to convert on that every time, and then just not being able to convert, Varlamov, I mean, Berra, even though we thought Berra was going to be a good thing coming into this game, he ended up stopping 35 or 37, and I think that was really the big factor in this game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he played extremely well. I mean, if you remember too, at the end of the second period there, Kessler almost scored with about 9 seconds left, and then he pulled the Bo Jackson. He broke the stick over his knee in frustration. I mean, the game was still 2-2 at that point. We had a chance, but I think the power play was again another problem, Eddie. We had some chances on the power play in the third period to tie the game and get, force it maybe overtime. But, the Ducks just couldn't get it done with the extra man.
Yeah, and it's been a problem all season. The power play has been one of the worst in the league, which you look at some of the teams in the top of the league. You see the Rangers and the Habs as well, and their power play is near the bottom 20 of the league too, which is something you don't see all the time. Usually, you would expect one of the three of the top teams in the league have their power play near the top, but I think that's really become a trend lately, and it's something that if the Ducks want to go far in the playoffs, they're gonna have to work on and improve on, especially with the addition of Wisniewski on the blue line.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the playoffs and things that we can do that will get them better and past that second round, as a lot of people have harped on lately. In this game too, a lot of players were rested. Matt Beleskey was out. Talked to him practice on Thursday. He's going to be back for sure for the playoffs, and we may see him in one or two of these last final games. So he sat out rested. Stoner rested as well. And they also had Getzloff out. He wasn't sick or injured as far as I heard. It was just a healthy scratch. And, this was something that, usually we're not too critical of the Ducks coaching staff and things. But I was a little upset by this, Eddie, just because of the fact that the first seed is still up for grabs. Going into this game, the Ducks needed to win to keep the pace above the Predators. Obviously, the Predators lost in overtime last night, which helped out the Ducks, and we're now back in control. But at the time of the game, we weren't in control. And I mean, I don't like to question the staff too much, but I don't know. I just think Getzlaff probably should have played in this game, especially with the 4 days off coming up here, Eddie.
Yeah, you see that a lot though. You've seen that in recent years, and with the Penguins resting Crosby and Malkin for the final two or three games of the season, and we've seen that before, last year as well with the Ducks, and even when they're going for the President's Trophy last year, we've seen them rest Getzlaf and Perry at times, and you just see it. It's just kind of a trend that happens in the final few games of the season. Coaches want to make sure that their players, their star players don't get hurt in the last few games, and obviously it gets harped on because they ended up losing the game, and Getzlaf could have made a huge contribution to it, but it's not like it's the reason they lost. They ran into a hot goalie in Berra, but I don't think it should be looked on too negatively. It happens all the time, and if you got to rest somebody, you want to rest Getzlaf so he doesn't get hurt for the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just thought maybe the time would have come against a more physical Dallas team, or maybe in that last game against Arizona, when the first seed's locked up. But in any event, it actually worked out for the Ducks because now that Nashville lost in the overtime game, the Ducks are back in the driver's seat for that first seed again. And we'll talk about some of the tie-breaking things here in a moment when we talk about the playoffs. But they're back in the spot, and that's a good thing. On this last game too. What did you think about Niacin? A lot of people were asking questions about that. He did really well in his minor league hockey, and we can go over some of the stats. But looked like he had a pretty good game, and on that fourth line, Eddie.
Yeah, he only played about 7 minutes, so it's not like we were expecting too much from him. I believe he also had a pretty good shot on goal, which was a good chance for him. And you're not going to get a lot of chances on that line. He was playing with two younger guys in Wagner and Edam, so it's pretty much an energy line, and he's a big physical guy. He's 6'2", 205 pounds. So I believe he's right now. He might develop more skill when he gets more games in the NHL, but he played a physical checking role with Wagner on that line, and opened up space for Edam. I think he had a pretty solid game. I wasn't expecting a ton from him, especially on that line. But it wasn't a bad game. He deserved the call up. He had 13 points in 23 games with Norfolk, so I think it was a solid game for him, and he deserves to get the call up in the end of the season.
Yeah, and talking about that, for those of you that don't remember, we ended up getting him in that Bobby Ryan trade along with Silverberg. So that's how that all came about. If you forgot about that, and I also talked to Danny about Niacin too. If you some of you remember, we had her on the podcast earlier when we first started this whole process, and we're going to have her on too in the summertime. We're going to talk more about the Admirals and the goals when the season's over and things settle down. But she had some good things to say about Nyson. Said that he can take the body well, that he'll go into those dirty areas and do the little things that people don't always notice. Also mentioned that he's good at back checking. And really, the only downside that she said, and you and I talked about this before, which is for most rookies, is just getting adjusted to the speed of the game, Eddie.
Yeah, that's the big thing. It's we talked about it with Sekach as well, coming over from Europe and adapting to the NHL, and it's the same thing coming up from the AHL. The other before this season, the meaningful hockey that he's played has only been in the OHL, so it's going to take a while for him to adapt. He plays right wing where there's a little bit more space for him to crack the lineup, compared to some other guys. So you might see him maybe take up that fourth line role if they don't, if Beleskey doesn't re-sign and they think he has a better chance over Jackman. But I think right now it's a little bit of a long shot for next season if he's going to play or not.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's something we'll have to look at, and that brings up another point too. Some of you remember we had Thomas that had been on before. He had written a lot of articles about the prospects and everything in the summer. He's again going to do a whole bunch of series of articles on all of those players as well, and other players coming up from this last draft. So make sure in the summertime we'll have plenty of information out there for you guys. I know that the summertime is kind of a downtime, but we're going to be covering all that minor and league and draft stuff for you guys. Um, Going into this week, Eddie, the Ducks have got 2 games to go. We're 4 points ahead of the Predators for that final spot, and we also know that the Predators have 1 game in hand. The good thing is now the Ducks are in the driver's seat. So if we win out in regulation and overtime, we can take home that top spot in the West, Eddie.
Yeah, and it's growing more important every day as you probably can see Minnesota is going to be the team that's going to be in the first wild card spot, and then it's going to be one of either Vancouver, Calgary, Los Angeles, or Winnipeg in that second wild card spot. And I don't think anybody wants to play Minnesota with how they've been playing, and we talked about it last week. They're good at home, good on the road. They've got good goaltending finally, and they're starting to get scoring from guys like Vanek and Parise. So, um, that's why resting Getzlaf, I think, was such an issue, and that's why a lot of people were talking about it. And you mentioned too is, that first spot means so much with how the playoff matches are seeming to go, and possibly having to play the Kings if you get that first matchup, and it's a tough decision. Do you want the Minnesota Wild, or do you want to take your chances and hope the Kings don't make the playoffs and you get a team like Winnipeg or Calgary? It's a tough decision, but I think all in all, everybody would like to grab that first spot in the West for the second year in a row.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know some people make a big deal about home ice and others don't, but I mean, still, if you get down to a seventh game, you want to play that seventh game at home. I mean, obviously that hasn't worked out for the Ducks recently, but I mean, I think things are going to be a little bit different. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But one other issue that came up, I know a lot of people had questions about the ROW and the tie-breaking procedures. Just wanted to clear that up for everybody because I know it can be confusing, but the way it works at the end of a season is when two teams are tied and tied in terms of points, they look at ROW. And ROW is the regulation and overtime wins. I know some people go, well, why don't they just look at the regular wins? Well, the reason why this is in place, and Eddie can help me out with this, is that they want the team that has played a better 60-minute game or a 60-minute plus the 5-minute overtime uh, session to advance over the other team because we don't see it too much, but some teams could in the overtime, not play for the win, play for the tie, and then rely on a shootout, Eddie. So that's kind of why that it was invented.
Yeah, and I think it's really just if you had to pick a tiebreaker out of anything, it's really the most fair option. Goals for. You can't really pick that because there are some teams here at the top of the league that they don't score as many goals, but that they win just as many games. And if you go for wins, then you're also including the shootout. And if the NHL is trying to phase out the shootout, they want a tiebreaker that's able to last past that phase of the league. So the ROW is pretty much the simplest way they can. At least for the first tiebreaker, it's the simplest thing they can do. Then it kind of gets a little bit more complicated after that. But it's a fair thing, and it comes into play. And for some teams, the teams that just miss out on the playoffs because of it, and you could see a team like Winnipeg, and I'm sure if they miss out on the playoffs because of ROW to the Kings, a lot of their fans aren't going to be happy. But there has to be a way to split the tie. So I think if you had to pick a way, that's definitely the most fair way to split the tie.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next one basically that separates it, if two teams are tied in the number of points and they're tied in the row, what they then look at is they look at the points against each other. For example, they would look at the Ducks playing the Predators this season and how the points would go. It's a little bit more complicated because it depends on the number of games and I'll kind of make it as simple as possible. But basically, if you play an even number of games, say 2 games against each other or 4 games, they take those points against each other. So if you've got obviously more wins and you get more points, you would have that tie break. Where it gets confusing is if there's an odd number of games. If there's an odd number of games, then they count the last two or the last four. That would make that even. So they just wouldn't count whoever had the extra home game. And that's how it kind of works. There's some links I put up on a couple of the articles, and I put some on Facebook, and I'll keep putting those out there, and everybody can always message me or email me, and I'll get you those little summaries and stuff to kind of explain that. But that's how it goes. And like I said, if you have any more questions, just you can always contact us, and we'll try our best to simplify it for you. Um, going into these 2 games, Eddie, I think part of it's going to depend on what happens with the Predators. They're playing, Tuesday night before the Ducks play Wednesday against Dallas. So I think it's kind of hard to say what the lineups will be like on Wednesday. If Nashville loses on Tuesday, I expect maybe some more players to be rested on Wednesday, Eddie.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if Perry is rested or Getzlaf is rested. Maybe maybe Lindholm or somebody else, but I think if or maybe Kessler if his elbows are still bugging him. But I think if anybody's going to be rested, it's probably the two big guys. Perry's had 2 big games against Dallas so far this season. He's picked up 4 points. It all depends. If Bruce wants to make a push for the first in the West and he feels like he needs both of them in the lineup, then I'm sure he's going to start them. It's not like we have, two teams that are fighting for the playoffs or two really strong teams we have to face going into these next 2 games. We've beat the Stars both games this season 2-1 and 3-1, and then the Coyotes are obviously one of the worst teams in the league. So I think there's probably a good chance somebody gets rested. it all depends. It's really up to Bruce if he decides that he wants to go for it or maybe save the guys for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, Eddie, and I think it depends on what happens in that Nashville game too. Because there's probably two trains of thoughts here. If Nashville loses, you could put in most of the guys, beat Dallas Wednesday night. We're good to go, and then rest whoever you want against Arizona on that final game on Saturday. So that's another option. Or like you said, you may want to rest some more players because don't forget Dallas is a physical team. They play us, physical. If Nashville loses, maybe Boudreau says, "Hey, let's rest a few players. We don't want to risk anybody getting injured." So, I think for the way it's going to go is you just really got to see what's going to happen on Tuesday. But I agree with you. I think some players, regardless of the outcome of that game, will get rested.
Yeah, and I think this is the advantage to Nashville playing that game is it really allows Bruce to do what he thinks is going to be best for the team. And like you said, if Nashville wins that game, it puts a little bit of pressure on the Ducks to go and grab a win, or Nashville, is in the driver's seat for that first spot. But if they lose, then there's no way they can catch you if you lose the game. All you have to do is win that last game against Phoenix. So, you could rest Getzlaf and Perry and then go all out in that last game against Arizona.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll just have to wait and see what's going to go on. And I know some updates too on practice. We put up on some of the guys yesterday. In case you missed it, Beleskey and Maroon did skate yesterday. I know there was some conflicting reports out there. What happened is they skated before the team skate at Anaheim Ice, so they were out there. Maroon had been battling being sick. Beleskey had a lower body injury, which he'd been dealing with, and he's been banged up here and there. He had the shoulder issue too earlier in the season that kept him out for a little bit. But I would expect them both to be back. Maybe not the Dallas game, but they should be back by Arizona game, and they definitely will be back for the playoffs. So that's kind of the update there on that situation. And it looks good. I think the good thing about this, Eddie, one of the things we talked about going to the playoffs is being healthy, and all the Ducks right now are doing pretty well.
Yeah, and that wasn't the case in the beginning of the season. They ended up fighting through it, and I think even if Beleskey's not ready, and if Jackman's not ready, and or if somebody else picks up an injury before the playoffs, so that's why we kept a guy Beleskey, and picked up these extra players to fill the depth, and with Nason coming up and getting some experience, I think unless somebody unless Getzlaf, Perry, or Kessler are going to go down, I think we've got the depth to fill out the lineup, and fill any issues.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's the key. I think the team has the depth. We've talked about what's going on for the playoffs and what they need to do, and obviously, once this week's over and we do our next podcast, we'll have a series preview against whoever we face, whether or not it's Calgary or Vancouver, or the Kings. Highly unlikely, but maybe Minnesota. You just never know. So we'll have a whole special podcast on that, but as we look at the playoffs now, we've already talked about the goalie situation. There's not really much more to cover on that. Bruce just has to pick who he wants to start in there, and hopefully he figures it out. We all think it's going to kind of be Anderson, but we'll have to wait and see. But what else do you think, Eddie, the Ducks need to do? There's a few other things out there that people have been talking about. What else can the Ducks fine tune in this next week of practice and the two games?
I think they've done a lot better at fine tuning the penalty kill as of late. I think the main thing right now is making sure the power play is in the top 10, in the top at least 8 in the playoffs, if not top 10 at the end of the season. I don't think they can reach that by now, but at least pick it up in these next few games and have it going into the playoffs. And I think they've worked on it a little bit lately. Is making sure that they lock down those second periods and not have those types of periods where they either get outshot 20-5, or they're letting 3 goals on 4 shots like Calgary. So I think those are the two main things they have to work on, is just lock down the second period and then at least pick up the power play. And if you get 5 chances in a game, at least score once or twice.
Yeah, I think that the power play has been an issue. I think there was a report that you wanted to mention too about they were talking about the Rangers, the Canadians, and the Ducks, and they were harping on special teams, and they're also harping on puck possession, weren't they not, Eddie?
Yeah, there was an article on NHL.com a while ago. Wasn't able to find it when I looked back, but they talked about how the Rangers, Montreal, and Anaheim at the time, and I believe still now, are the top four teams, or top three teams in the NHL, and how they have to overcome major odds to actually win the Stanley Cup. They looked at the past champions and their power plays and penalty kills. At least one of them has been in the top 10, if not the top five, and then their Corsi percentages have been as well in the top. Usually the top five, if not the best. The LA Kings and the Boston Bruins, Chicago Blackhawks have all been good puck possession teams when they've won the cup. And then you look at the top three teams this year. Their power play are all in the bottom 20. Their penalty kills are not that great, and their Corsi percentages are also in the bottom 20. So, that's I think that's where a lot of people look at Corsi and they say, well, what does the stat really matter if you look at the top three teams in the league and you say, well, if those three teams aren't good puck possession teams, why does the stat matter? But then you also look at the last, three or four Stanley Cup champions and they've all been good puck possession teams, and you look at where the LA Kings have come in the season and being a good puck possession team and coming in eighth and then end up going all the way and winning the Stanley Cup. So there's a lot of mixed reviews on the stat and if it really matters, but I think it's still to be proven if it matters. Obviously, the results in the regular season say it doesn't, but then if you look at who's won the cup, you could argue that it does.
Yeah, and the Corsi stat, just to explain it, there's a couple of them out there for you that don't know what it is, and we've gotten more familiar with it this season too. But basically, when you watch a game, sometimes you'll see one team has 40 shots and another team has 20, and you may sit back there and think, oh man, the team with the 20 shots isn't playing well. Which isn't necessarily always true. I mean, sometimes yes, it is, but the way Corsi works is they look at your shots on net, your block shots, and your missed shots. And what they do is they total that up and then they compare it to your opponent. So what happens is you want a higher percentage in your favor, basically. It's kind of like when we look at the faceoff stats and you see your team has 52% or 53% faceoff win percentage. That's how the Corsi works. You want to be above that 50%. You want to be the team that has the more shot attempts and blocks and on net. And the theory behind all of this is it's to translate it into the team has the puck more is the team that's going to have more opportunities and is going to score more. And that's the simple way of explaining it. And it's not always the case. I guess the best way I can compare it, Eddie, is to to the Oakland A's and their whole on base percentage. They went on the theory that more base runners on base, you get more chances to score, you win the game. And so that kind of translates into this, where Corsi is really based on, hey, whoever has the puck more and has more opportunities is the one that's probably going to win.
Yeah, and the real reason advanced stats have really come, to a big thing since baseball and have worked their way into hockey is that everybody wants to try and just have an edge, and the new thing to try and have an edge on their opponents. And of course he's worked its way in, and I'm not going to say you or me are experts on CORSI. I know like a very vague amount and probably just the definition of CORSI, but so if you want to look it up for yourself, feel free to go look it up. There's a lot of new advanced stats going along with CORSI, the shot relativity, and a bunch of other things that look at the to show the game in a new light. They're all pretty confusing compared to regular plus minus goals, assists, those kind of stats, but they're a new way that a lot of people, especially the old hockey guys and the guys who are running the general managers of their teams and so on. A lot of them aren't really big on the advanced stats yet, but I think they do have a place, but it remains to be seen if they really make a huge difference or not.
Yeah, I think part of the confusion too, Eddie, is Corsi by itself is a pretty good stat because it adds in the missed shots and block shots as opposed to just looking at plus minus numbers or just shots in a game. But where part of the problem comes in, and I've seen this, and I've been doing some research on this the last couple of weeks, trying to figure this out. And like you said, I'm not an expert, and you're not an expert. But we're just trying to at least cover it so everybody understands. Is when they talk about advanced Corsi stats, what they add in there is game situations. So basically, you can go online and look, and you can always message me or email me, and I have several websites that explain it. But they look at in addition to those shot attempts and blocks and whatnot. But they also look at when the score is tied, when teams are plus or minus a goal or plus or minus 2 goals, and there's a whole theory behind that too. I don't put too much weight behind that. I think it's a little bit too technical. Regular Corsi, I think does make sense, but I just wanted to cover some of this stuff because I know it's come up, and I put it in an article, and some people had some questions. But going to the playoffs, I think the big key is, I mean, puck possession is going to be a big key for the Ducks, but I think part of that is going to be the faceoffs, Eddie. I mean, that's why we got Ryan Kessler. That's what's going to help us. And I think that goes along with the special teams. I think those are really the two big areas that the Ducks need to focus on, whoever they play.
Yeah, and I don't think it really means, we have to go and change our game and change ourselves to a puck possession, team. That's obviously that's, we're not that type of team. And we've shown that all season. We've been successful not being that type of team. So I think, focus on more of the other things we've talked about, power play and shutting down second periods, good goaltending, solid defense, getting the ugly goals in front of the net, getting guys in front of the net like Maroon and Perry, and just sticking to our type of game that's made us successful all season.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the other big parts about it, and you touched on it, especially on the power play and just on the forecheck, is getting the big body in front of the net. Getting Jackman in there in front of the net, getting Maroon in there in front of the net. That's one of the biggest keys. I mean, because you look at some of these goalies, and you take Quick for example. I mean, the way you beat him is you get people in front. I mean, that one goal he got all bent out of shape over is when we had Thompson in front of him and he couldn't see it. I think that's the biggest key for the Ducks is to get that one single body in the front, especially on the power play. That's what I think's been missing. I think having Vatanen and Wisniewski in there is going to help, obviously, quarterback the power play and get those blue line shots in there. But we just need more traffic, I think, especially on that man advantage, Eddie.
Yeah, and you look at some of the goalies we'd have to play, possibly Quick or Pavlik or Ramo and Hiller, Miller and Lack or Dubnik in Minnesota. So you're either playing a big goalie who's playing well, or one of the world's best goalies, or some goalies who are playing really well lately. You're not really going in playing against a goalie who's struggling, or a smaller goalie. You gotta get guys in front of these guys, especially if you go in and you're playing a guy like Dubnik who's 6'5" and playing well lately. You got to get bodies in front of him so he can't see, because most of the time he's going to be able to look over any of the screens. You put a guy like Cogliano in front of the net, he's going to be able to see over him. You want to get the big guys in front of the net, the guys that are going to pester him and get under his skin. And I think that's why we picked up a guy like Maroon, and Perry's basically modeled his whole career after that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think another issue going into these playoffs is basically the closeout games too, Eddie. In the last three series, the Ducks have been in five closeout games, and they've lost four of those five games. Two of them to Detroit, game 6 and 7. Obviously, the two to the Kings in game 6 and 7, and then we pulled out that one against Dallas, though we had to come back, and win in overtime. But I think that doing the screens and working on the special teams and the forecheck and all those things are things that they're going to need to do a solid 60 minutes, especially in those closeout games. I mean, I'd really like to see whoever we play, that if we get the opportunity to beat them in 5 or 6 games, that we get it done, Eddie.
And I think that they've shown a little bit of that this season. Obviously, you can't transfer it over to the playoffs, but being able to hold out and close out these one goal games, and how many one goal games we've won this season, and rarely ever tossing away a lead and blowing a game, I think is a huge step forward. And everybody's talked about all season, if it can transfer into the playoffs. Obviously, look at the goal differentials compared to other teams around us. Ours is at least 15 points worse than theirs, but we're still sitting at the top of the standings, and I think that's that has to be because of all the one goal games we've been able to win. And if that can transfer into the playoffs, I think that's going to be a major factor in being able to win those elimination games.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people harp on the Ducks. Some of the other professionals out there talk about the one goal games, and how it's kind of not necessarily a good thing to rely on it. But I agree with you. I mean, when you go into these playoff games, I mean, the game of hockey is inches. Let's be real. I mean, a lot of these games in the playoffs come down to one goal or maybe two. I mean, you don't see 5-1, 6-1 in a lot of these games. I mean, and playoff hockey is a whole another level of hockey, and the fact that the Ducks can win one goal games and, like you said, get that lead early. is probably a key. And basically hold it down because when they have the lead going into the third period, the Ducks are almost unstoppable, Eddie.
Yeah, and even when they go down a couple goals in the third period, we've seen them score 4 goals or 3 goals in a period and come back and win it, against a team or, against Boston the other week, Perry getting the late goal and gets left pulling out on OT. They just seem to, they did that a bit last season, but it was mostly just they were always coming from behind, and that was the problem. And then you go into the playoffs, and a lot of games you get behind, you can't come from behind, and I think that's where they've changed this season is if they don't get behind often, if they do, they still have that comeback effort, but usually they try and get ahead and stay ahead, and if they're ahead going into the second period, they can usually work it out and get a 1 goal win, which is a big change from last season.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of that too we talked about is the second period slump too. I think if the Ducks can eliminate that second period slump and maintain a 1 or 2 goal lead going into the third period, that's going to be a key. And I think that's really going to be a key, for this killer instinct in the playoffs. I mean, in order to close out these teams and take it to them, and it's also important, Eddie, because if you keep playing 7 game series all the way, I mean, I don't care what team you are. I mean, you're gonna get tired that eventually people are going to get injured. I mean, it's just beneficial all the way around to try and win a series in 5 or 6 games.
Yeah, we've seen it happen. Obviously, LA last year winning those three first series in 7 games each, and it can happen, but it's rare. And I believe that was the first time where a team has just won 3 game sevens to get to the Stanley Cup final. So it doesn't happen often, and you got to go in and either sweep a series or win one in five if you want to keep going and have enough energy to make it all the way to the finals.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be beneficial. I mean, it can happen, but I don't want to rely on game sevens, obviously, given our track record in the last, 3 series. But another question that comes up, or actually, I guess a lot of comments too. A lot of people draw attention to Boudreau and the playoffs, and he's been in the postseason 6 times now. 4 times with Washington and a couple times with the Ducks now, and hasn't got past the second round. So I get a lot of questions about hey, what's going to happen, if this or that, and I don't like to go into speculation mode. And a lot of people are saying if we don't get past the second round, something's going to happen. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, and I had talked about this on another podcast too, is a lot of people look at Sutter and Quinville as really good coaches, and obviously they are. They both won 2 Stanley Cups in the last recent 5 6 years here, so obviously they're doing something right. But I just wanted to compare Boudreaux to them so people know. When Sutter started, and granted, they're different teams that he coached. He coached Calgary. He also actually coached the Blackhawks back in the day too. But his first 10 seasons where he was a coach, he only got past the second round 1 time. And Quinville, in his 12 years, first 12 years, he only got past the second round twice. So I know people look at Boudreaux and go, "Oh, he hasn't gotten past the second round in 6 years." So I just want to put that in perspective so people realize that. I mean, obviously the expectations are high this year. They were high last year. I'm not saying that if he doesn't get past the second round that we shouldn't be hard on him, but I'm just saying put it in perspective. Those two coaches, it took over a decade to get where they are, Eddie.
Yeah, and it's really coming down to getting the right team put together, having your style of coaching work with the players that you have, and just have everything clicking and winning enough games and to make the playoffs, and then and making the round of the Stanley Cup Finals. And you look at the teams, you look at the Chicago teams that have won the cup, and you look at the LA teams that have won the cup, and you look at the teams they've had with Kopitar and Doughty and Quick, and they've got goaltending, defense, two centers, like, two solid centers. Where they've talked about how the West you need to have two big centers, like Kopitar and Carter, and you look at Taves and Kane and Hossa and Sharp and Crawford and Keith and Seabrook and Chicago. It's not like they've won with terrible teams. You could argue those were the two of the best teams in the that have won the cup in a long time. Two of the solid teams. You look at some of the other teams that won, when the Penguins won, you could just rely on Crosby and Malkin. But I think it all comes down to the you look at Boudreau and does his style of play work with the Ducks? And you look at the last 2 seasons, you have to say it does. And do we finally have the depth and the quality to make a long run? And bringing in Kessler and having finally a second line center that is actually of quality compared to some of the guys we've had, since Andy McDonald and the other guys since we won the cup. And I think this is the year where it really matters, and I think that we've got everything in place and the style's working, and everybody's playing well. I think if we can everything can click and we can get everything to work in the playoffs. And I definitely think this is probably the year we can get past the second round.
Yeah, I agree, Eddie. I think, other than the power play, I mean, I think everything's going well for the Ducks. Like you mentioned, we've got the two good centers now, the 1-2 punch in Kessler and Getzloff, and the defense is pretty rock solid now. Murray, we talked about before he won the trade deadline. I don't care what people say. He did phenomenal. If he wasn't the best GM during that time, then he had to be in the top five or three at least. So all the pieces are there. The defense is there. Goaltending, we'll get one goalie picked and we'll go with that. So I think this is the year the Ducks do get past the second round. Um, will they go to the Stanley Cup final, win it all? Obviously, that's what we want. We'll see what happens. I mean, I have a lot of faith that the team will get that far. I think they can beat anybody we play in the West. If we get that far, it'll depend on who we play in the East. If it's a New York Ranger team or Montreal or someone else sneaks in there and surprises everybody, I don't know. But I have a lot of confidence in the coaching staff and the management of the team, and I do think that they're going to go far this postseason. And I think it's a good thing for the fans, Eddie. I think it's going to be an exciting time. The months of April and May, and hopefully the beginning of June.
Yeah, and I think when you look at a lot of people harp on the coach, I think it's hard to throw, the most winningest coach in NHL history, and at least the winningest active coach right now, under the bus with the 2 seasons he's had lately, and possibly clinching the Western Conference for 2 seasons in a row, back-to-back 50-win seasons and three division titles in a row. It's hard to, obviously it all comes down to playoff success, but it's hard to throw him under the bus and say, oh, we need a new coach or it's his fault that we haven't got past the second round. It's not easy. There's only 16 teams, and usually all 16 have a chance to go far, and it's not easy to win 20, 16 games and win the Stanley Cup. So I think everybody's just gotta believe in Bruce. I think maybe 5 years down the road, if we've made the playoffs every year and haven't got past the second round, there might be an issue. But it's only been a couple seasons, and I don't think it's a real issue right now.
Yeah, I agree, Eddie. I think that we're set now. It's just a matter of staying healthy this next week, ironing out those little issues, and we'll be fine. And we'll be good. And like we said, next week we'll do a podcast. We'll preview whoever we're going to play, go over all of that. We've also got the podcast up on a couple more places now. It's up on Stitcher.com, so you can go on there and check it out. I'm getting it on TuneIn.com as well. I had to submit some stuff, so it should be up on there too. Obviously, it's still up on iTunes and YouTube, of course, but we're just trying to get it in a few more places just to get it out there. And for those of you that are still doing the competition or contest, I should say, for the 2 tickets to Fan Appreciation Night, make sure you go back. If you listen to the last 4 podcasts, there's a keyword that we gave out at the end of those podcasts that make up a phrase. If you think you have the phrase, go ahead and email it to us. It's DucksNPucks@usa.com. We extended the deadline too. We're going to let everybody have till Monday night at midnight. I know that we did the last podcast in the middle of the week, so I want to give people, more opportunity to get in that drawing. And email us, like I said, by Monday night at midnight. We'll announce the winner Tuesday. There'll be 2 tickets, section 418 to Fan Appreciation Night on Wednesday. And also check out our shirts. I found out that one of our writers is actually a really good artist. I wish I would have known sooner, but we've got a Beleskey design already done that we'll be announcing in this week. We have a Cogliano one that's being worked on, and a couple more that are coming too. You can check out all the shirts on DNPhockey.com. That's just the abbreviation for Ducks and Pucks, so it's DNPhockey.com. And we'll be back next week, and we'll be talking about the playoffs, Eddie. I'm excited. I can't wait.
Yeah, I think everybody's excited to see how it's going to go and who we get matched up in the first round.
All right, and that's it. Everybody have a happy Easter. See you next week.
The Anaheim Ducks are the Stanley Cup champions.